bring the human dimension into our systems thinking, we are going to welcome Keneilwe Munyai, a human-centered designer and systems change facilitator. Her talk, Transforming Systems and Design Thinking, the Bigger Picture, explores how creativity, empathy, and collaboration can reshape the systems that define how we live, work, and consume. Can we clap our hands for Keneilwe?
Good morning. So, having been here yesterday for the first time and hearing from all the different participants and different talks made me realize, because often the spaces that I work in, sometimes as a designer I feel like an outsider. Whereas yesterday, I felt like I was amongst fellow peers, which was quite interesting. And I loved a lot of what I heard yesterday. But I am going to bring a different perspective today, talking about human-centered design and design thinking and systems transformation. And I would like to start by maybe talking about what I think, or how I think secularity work or can work. And the reason for this is that I've been working with a lot of social entrepreneurs who are trying to develop solutions to biodiversity issues in the Southern Africa region. And a lot of the time, it's people who are really passionate about solving challenges that they see within their communities. But the problem is that you can have passion. At times, if you don't have the financial support or you don't have the business models to support your vision, it doesn't get anywhere. It doesn't go anywhere. And what I think is critical when it comes to secularity is the notion of collective efficiency. How many of you have heard of the term collective efficiency? Just show of hand if you've heard of collective efficiency. Okay, we have 2 people. So when we are talking about collective efficiency, we're talking about the notion of working together as actors, not only to reduce cost, but also from a production or a service perspective, okay? I think for me, what is critical is that we know that in other spaces, this notion of a lone genius as an entrepreneur is pretty much prevalent. But when it comes to secularity, we need to have a completely different mindset, realizing that you cannot achieve the impact you want to achieve as a lone genius. You need others. You need to collaborate with others, okay? And what is also important with collective efficiency as well is that it moves away from this notion of thinking about setting up big systems that are not able to adapt when changes are required. Because an entity can remain small, but partner with others in order to support them to achieve the impact that they need to achieve. And as a result, they remain flexible and they are able to adapt to changes. Because remember, we keep learning, and the more we learn about the impact we have on the environment, the more we come up with regulations, and the more we need to adapt to those regulations. And often big entities are not able to adapt quickly because they have these huge setups. They've invested a lot of upfront cost to setting up their systems. So for me, what I think, especially for the African continent, is to have these small, agile entities that are able to adapt, but working as a collective. Of course, that is not an easy thing, because we all talk about collaboration all the time, but collaboration is not easy. And one of the biggest things is lack of trust, okay? And as a result of that, and the irony of all of this is that in a lot of African cultures, collective efficiency is already practiced from a social perspective. Communities come together and do stuff together, but when it comes to business, that's where we start pulling in different directions because there is lack of trust. And this is something that we can work towards, and it requires radical collaboration. Has anyone heard of the term radical collaboration? So when we are talking about radical collaboration, we are talking about bringing together people who would otherwise not work together. And that requires a high level of empathy. Because in order for you to work together with people that you've never worked with before or that you're not used to working with before, it requires you to have empathy. And when we are talking about empathy, we're talking about the ability to listen. Listen to understand as opposed to listen to respond, which is something that as human beings, we often do. We often listen to have an immediate response to what is being said. But listening to really understand where the other person is coming from, what their perspective is, and what their experiences are, is quite important. Okay. And this is where the approaches that I use come in as well. So I use the human-centered design approach, which is an empathetic approach to problem solving, problem understanding, and problem solving and innovation, okay? And human-centered design uses processes like design thinking, user-centered design, and service design, okay? And these processes give us tools that helps us as we practice and apply the tools, we are able to cultivate the mindsets that are required to solve complex problems. And when we are talking about processes and tools, we are talking about participatory processes. Design thinking is a team sport, is not something that you can do on your own. And this is where radical collaboration comes in as well, okay? Working with others to understand the problem that you are trying to solve, and then co-creating solutions together. And the value of working collaboratively is that it helps you see things from different perspectives. It helps you see what other perspectives are, whether it's diversity in terms of disciplines that are involved in projects, or it's diversity in terms of cultures, and diversity, and often when we're talking about diversity as well, we only refer to it in terms of cultures and disciplines, but there's also diversity in terms of styles of working, which is quite important. Because some of us are good at generating ideas, and some of us are good at evaluating ideas, and some of us are good at coordinating resources, etc. And having a good mix of all these different skill sets is also quite important when you're trying to develop solutions or interventions. And that is even more important when we are trying to develop solutions to complex environmental issues as well. And the other aspect that I want to speak to is this notion of being human-centered. Often when I work with social entrepreneurs, they are interested in solving a biodiversity issue, And they are frustrated by the fact that community members are cutting down the forest, and they want to come up with a solution to this issue. But at the core of all the environmental problems that we are trying to solve, there are humans. And understanding who those people are, and understanding the what and the why of their behavior is important to developing solutions that actually work. Because at the end of the day, if you are not involving the people and going full steam ahead as a lone genius and developing a solution, that solution is not going to get very far. You might at the beginning have a funder who's backing you, but as we have seen the changes globally, you can't rely on funders alone. So you also need to think about sustainable business models. And so processes like design thinking don't only help us in terms of cultivating participatory mindsets, but they also help us in terms of understanding problems, but also developing solutions that make sense and meet the needs of the context. But they also help us in terms of developing business models that work for the context in which we operate in as well. And then the last thing that I want to quickly speak to is some of the key mindsets that I think are very important while working in circularity. So I mentioned empathy first as one of the key mindsets. And when you're talking about empathy, it's not just about understanding, it's also about seeing a situation from a human point of view instead of a systemic or organizational perspective alone. Understanding the needs of the people and their constraints is quite important. And the second mindset that I want to speak to is curiosity. When we're talking about curiosity, we're talking about an aspect that enables us to push up against static tendencies such as confirmation bias or stereotyping, or going back to existing knowledge instead of new insights. Because curiosity is actually a tool that can help us to see complex situations in a new light. But we need to be open to asking questions and listening to what other perspectives are in those problems. And then the next mindset that I want to speak to is optimism. There's a Maori proverb that says, "Turn your face to the sun, and the shadow will fall behind you." And what this means is that we're all working in very complex environments. We're all facing challenges, but we always need to remain optimistic, because when we are focusing on cynicism, it shuts down creativity and thoughts. While optimism is very generative, it allows us to come up with solutions, think of better ways of doing things. And then the last one that I want to speak to is this notion of experimentation. Experimentation is used a lot in the design space, where we create prototypes of everything that we are trying to develop. What this does is that it helps us to test our ideas before we invest a lot of resources, time, and money on solutions that might not actually work. And they help us to communicate our ideas to others and get feedback so that we can learn. Because in human-centered design, the way we work iteratively, constantly testing our solutions to make sure that they make sense in the context of use, and we are not just wasting time and resources. And then the one thing that I want to maybe end with is a question for all of you. And the question is, what would happen if we were to treat radical collaboration as a key ingredient in circular economy? And hopefully you guys think about it, because I think it's definitely a valuable thing. We've heard yesterday from the different talks about people working with communities, etc. I think we need even more people involved in circular economy, not just us in the room, but bringing in even the ones who are not there yet. I think it's our responsibility to make sure that it's not just for certain individuals, but everybody gets involved. That's how we're going to save the environment.